It all started when some guy ordered the poor girl to listen up, telling her that a worthless person like her finally had a job that could truly benefit the family. The man announced that from now on, Croa would become a pseudo-chosen one, the favorite of Diello Arsenta, the head of the fire family. The girl was ordered to get his first 3 nights, no matter what, which would ruin Arsenta's position. This would help their water family, the damsel family, to prosper. The man warned Croa that if she failed, she would only die a miserable death, and asked if she understood. In the carriage, the terrified girl realized that these memories and this face belonged to the protagonist of a novel she had read, Croa Allows. Croa Allows was the illegitimate daughter of a villainous family. The protagonist began to wail, wondering why, of all the worlds and characters, she had to be trapped in Croa Allows' body. Croa thought about the dark and steamy novel about the ducal families. The novel's main attraction was the insane power inheritance system among the 3 ducal families. Whoever possessed the strongest magical power would be marked as the next family head. To fully unlock their power, the heir had to, complete the ritual with their fated partner on their wedding night. The partner's name would be magically engraved on them, a true commitment. But if another woman took the heir's first night, he would only receive half of his power. It was a huge tragedy, and it couldn't be fixed even by uniting with the true fated partner later. There were no second chances. In the story, when the true fated partner appeared, Croa would be silenced by the Allows family, which was too cruel. The protagonist thought, "There's no way I'm dying like that." She agonized over how she had been tricked into possessing this cursed character. Was she supposed to just give up and wait for death? She solemnly promised herself that she would never let that happen. Since she was trapped in this body, she would rewrite the original plot and survive in Arsenta at all costs. The protagonist realized there was only one thing she had to do. Croa Allows arrived at the Arsenta family's estate, where Diello Arsenta greeted her. Seeing him, she thought to herself that he was truly the only kind and pure male character in the entire story. As soon as they entered the drawing room, the protagonist requested to speak with the Duke privately, and Diello ordered the knights to leave. The engaged couple coldly greeted each other. Croa declared that she wasn't really here to be his bride. Diello was confused and asked if she wanted to call off the engagement, but the protagonist replied no, instead stating that she was here to propose a deal. The girl offered to be his shield and fake wife, helping him become the most powerful head of the family. All of this would last until his true partner appeared. In exchange, Croa asked for his revenge against the Allows family, who had treated her as a commodity. Diello confirmed again, asking if she really said the deal would last until the real deal appeared. Croa affirmed it. The man said he was certain his name was engraved on her, so he didn't understand why she claimed to be a fake. He asked if Miss Croa was implying that Duke Allows had played him for a fool. Diello coldly pointed out that in that case, they couldn't just sit here and chat pleasantly. Croa knew very well that if the fact she was a pseudo-chosen one was exposed, the consequences would be dire and divorce would be inevitable. And even if Arsenta declared war on Allows, they wouldn't be able to fight back. She added that if she had intended to continue deceiving Lord Diello, she would have done so. Suddenly, she stood up, walked to the desk, and picked up a bottle of healing ointment. The move caught Diello off guard, but he had no idea what Croa was about to do next. She opened the jar and poured the entire contents on her own back. Then she turned around and showed him her back, where the name Diello Arsenta, his grace's name, was engraved. Diello's eyes widened in an instant as the engraving began to disappear as her skin healed. She explained that the name had been carved against her will. Then she asked, wasn't this proof enough that she was a pseudo-chosen one? Croa knew how much the Allows and Cartier families looked down on Arsenta, and that the current Arsenta head was considered the weakest. The young man said that although he knew Arsenta was underestimated, he didn't expect it to be this severe. He asked her what Allows would do to someone who tried to deceive a family head. She answered her own question, saying he wouldn't let such a person live a life worse than death. Then she firmly stated that she had no intention of following Duke Allows' plan. She explained that even if she had other plans, she knew better than anyone that neither side would let her live. The girl repeated her offer, a one-year marriage. This was necessary to lull both families until the real chosen one appeared. It would also help to eliminate allos after the succession ceremony. In return, she asked the Duke for his protection. Diello asked how he was supposed to trust her, someone sent by allos. The protagonist clarified her position, pointing out that she came to Arsenta alone and had no way to protect herself here. In other words, she was giving him an opportunity to use her to turn a crisis into an opportunity. After that passionate speech, Diello smiled, then took off his coat and draped it over the girl's shoulders. He announced that he accepted her offer and agreed to the marriage. A knock came from the door of the Duke's office. Diello let the maid in and asked if she had checked everything as they had discussed. She confirmed that the name engraved on her back was fake. And just as they thought, it reacted to the healing ointment and was getting weaker by the hour. The young Duke recalled his recent conversation with Croa. At the time, she had proposed that Diello use her while he searched for his true chosen one and built up his strength. The girl called herself a trump card that would allow the Allos and Cartier families to keep their guards down. Diello expressed his doubts, saying that the current Arsenta was powerless, especially after he inherited the power of the family head. The protagonist pointed out that this could be avoided, but the young man painfully noted that even the Arsenta family itself didn't believe that. Croa countered that if this guy were truly powerless, most of Arsenta's allies would have abandoned her long ago. Most importantly, Arsenta had the best intelligence network of the three great families, so the Duke would find the real chosen one quickly. During that conversation, she seemed to genuinely believe in Duke Diello's potential, and now his grace was actually considering this deal with the enemy. The young man noted that Croa really did seem different than before, and perhaps she had been hiding her true self all along. The Duke read a letter from Duke Allos, which laid out several demands. First, they had to give half the income from the Arsenta mines and farmlands to the ducal family of Allos. The letter stated this money was to cover Duchess Croa's living expenses. Second, they needed to station an additional 100 Allos knights in the Tim Gorge between Arsenta and Allos. This was because some undesirables had recently gathered there. The final point requested that Croa be allowed to return to the Allos ducal estate at least once a month. The Duke was heartbroken to be parting with such a beautiful daughter so soon. The Duke thought to himself that this was more than just paying huge living expenses for her, and the strategically important deployment of troops was now tilted in Allos' favor. But what really made his grace laugh was that Duke Allos called her his beautiful daughter. He thought sarcastically, who would send such a daughter to the enemy as a glorified pawn? Diello summoned a maid named Piella and ordered her to serve as the future duchess's personal attendant from now on. He added that Croa should be allowed to do as she pleased in Allos. Croa looked at the entire building they had constructed for the wedding and thought what an extravagant affair it was. The maid told her that at tonight's banquet, Croa Allos would be the brightest star. Piella explained that marriages between members of the three great families were extremely rare. The protagonist noted that everyone except the three great families and the royal family believed the rumor that they were getting married after a sweet romance. The maid was embarrassed and didn't know what to say. The girl remembered that in the novel, Piella was Arsenta's headmaid, and Piella was also an important character, a cleaner responsible for eliminating anyone who got in Arsenta's way. Croa had only read half of the original work, but she knew very well that the person who would come to chop off Croa, Allos' head, was Piella. It happened shortly after her identity as a pseudo-chosen one was exposed. That memory sent a chill down the protagonist's spine. Croa also thought that her deal with Diello was a big secret, but Diello probably knew. Croa wanted to test it, so she asked the maid if His Grace the Duke had personally ordered her to serve her. Piella confirmed it, saying she was ordered to fully support Croa Allos starting from today's banquet. After the wedding, Croa thought that, just as she expected, Diello had already shared information about the deal with Piella. So it turned out that Piella's duties, of course, also included protecting Croa herself. The protagonist said she understood and asked for her care in the future. Piella thanked her for her trust. Croa thought that despite Piella's sweet smile, she was still wary of her. Croa admitted to herself that even though she had no intention of deceiving anyone, it made her even more nervous. For the first time, Croa saw the endless sea. It was known that this territory was protected by the Fire Clan, the Arsenta family, the Water Clan, the Allos family, guarded the endless forest, and the Wind Clan, the Cartier family, watched over the desert where all things turned to dust. Protecting these areas was an ancient pact. Piella asked Croa what she thought of the place compared to Alo's endless forest. Croa replied that the sea was beautiful. The maid commented that she had heard people from the Alo's family were tired of water, but apparently that wasn't the case. Croa asked earnestly, her tone filled with sarcasm, how could one be tired of water when they could control it? It suddenly occurred to her that the Alo's family did have water-based abilities, although the original Croa had barely used them. She decided to test it and began to play with her powers, making the water in her glass float. She was completely stunned. What the hell is this? She asked herself. Croa thought that controlling water felt much more natural than described in the original work. The protagonist realized it was not only natural, but as easy as breathing. Piella interrupted her thoughts, telling her it was time to go to the banquet hall. The maid added that they needed to finish the greetings first. Croa obediently agreed. So the protagonist understood that her marriage to Arsenta would shake the entire empire, and she needed to play her part perfectly. She thought she had to pretend to be madly in love, just in case Duke Dello noticed. The soon-to-be married couple greeted each other before entering the ceremonial hall. Croa reminded Diello that today they had to look like a couple crazy for each other and asked if he was sure he could do it. Seeing his flustered reaction, she thought he was exactly like he was in the original novel. This pure and kind guy who couldn't lie was always flustered by his bride's willful behavior. He always followed her lead, but she knew that couldn't happen today or Duke Dello would scold her for not managing her husband well. So she decided to take the lead, telling Diello to just follow her, as she would be calling the shots. She also remembered the second strange tradition of imperial weddings, where the bride does not enter with the groom. So the bride walked into the ceremonial hall, and the banquet hall immediately filled with whispers. The guests murmured in surprise, many in disbelief that the Arsenta and Dello's families were now joined by marriage. The guest's attention was particularly focused on the Cartier family, whispering and wondering what they thought about this. One guest said that Cartier was currently led by Smida, the most powerful clan leader in the family's history, so they were probably doing fine. Another confirmed that the stronger the clan leader, the stronger the knights who draw power from the family, adding that as long as Smida ruled, not even monsters dared to approach their lands. Nevertheless, the guests agreed that with two of the three great families now married, Cartier's position had become uncertain. Finally, the arrival of Duke Dello of Arsenta was announced at the ceremony. The noble ladies immediately began to whisper about how handsome and mature he was. Then Croa walked towards him. According to another unique tradition of imperial weddings, only the groom can lift the bride's veil. The protagonist admitted to herself that even though this was all just an act, she was a little nervous. Diello then recited the ceremonial words, asking her to be his wife, and brought his lips towards hers. But in reality, their marriage was not sealed with a kiss, and the newlyweds' lips didn't even touch. Croa was angry and asked what that was all about. The Duke wanted to maintain their distance and be faithful to their agreement, stating that he had no feelings for her and didn't want to take what wasn't his. The girl assured him she was fine with that. Croa asked the Duke to come closer and kiss her properly. The young man obeyed his beloved, and they melted into a kiss. Everyone present gasped, watching the newlyweds' passionate and sweet kiss. When their lips parted, the girl asked him to kiss her again, only this time deeper and longer. Then she pleaded with the man to love her harder, more fervently, with everything he had. When he finally ended the kiss, she was breathless and completely caught off guard. The Duke's arms were like a vice, his fingers digging into Croa's skin. Diello smirked and reminded Croa that she promised to lead. The Duke told her to do whatever she wanted, to be bolder, and to love deeper. The wedding guests were stunned, the ladies covering their faces with fans, their cheeks hot with embarrassment. One of them blurted out that he couldn't believe these two rival families had actually united. Another guest said that high society's hottest power couple was about to be overthrown. Some guests philosophized that you never know what will happen in the end. Ultimately, everyone agreed that Diello and Croa looked very good together. After the wedding ceremony, a servant named Cassimus came to knock on the Duke's chamber door and entered after being given permission. Sir Casimus the Knight reported to His Grace that everything was proceeding as they had expected. The knight clarified that the Duke and the future Duchess's public appearance at today's wedding had already set the whole of high society abuzz. The Duke commented that this was largely thanks to the Duchess's active role. Sir Casimus added that Croa was also being talked about, but most people were discussing the Duke himself because he was acting in a way they weren't used to seeing. Diello understood this was because they all remembered his sickly childhood. He asked if this meant he and the lady looked good together today. Casimus confirmed that there were already rumors that the Duke and the future Duchess were a total power couple. Diello was pleased, saying the more rumors, the better, and instructed Casimus to quietly fuel the gossip without leaving a trace. The knight dutifully agreed and confirmed he would pass this information to the other members of the Arsenta family. Alone, the young man replayed every detail of the passionate kiss he had shared with her today. Diello could almost still feel the touch of her soft lips on his. Diello thought about Croa Lowe's, realizing that everything she had shown so far was just a facade. So Croa had been acting, but today he finally saw the real her. He remembered her telling him she would take the lead, and all he had to do was follow. To Diello, Croa Lowe's revealing her true colors meant she had gone all in. The protagonist looked at her subordinates, wondering why they were all so happy and excited about her wedding. Croa thought, does it really have to be this way? It felt strange to see everyone so happy, and she couldn't help but wonder if they knew what she was really like. Croa noticed that everyone seemed genuinely happy, and she thought, well, that's not so bad. Most importantly, the protagonist found that the news of their engagement had spread like wildfire among Arsenta's vanguard. It was like an inner circle, a community for spreading news to Arsenta's staunchest loyalists, even those who never left Arsenta. This basically meant the entire family knew about the deal. Piella thought it sounded like they had high hopes for the future Duchess. Croa asked if they looked like a sickeningly sweet couple, and the maid confirmed it. Then the protagonist asked Piella what it really looked like to her. The maid replied that to anyone who didn't know, it looked quite lovely. But the protagonist needed to know what it looked like to those in the know. After all, it wasn't just the socialites watching. The Allo's family was watching too. Croa pressed her, asking what their engagement really looked like to those who knew the truth. Piella said everything was fine, and honestly, you could totally believe she meant it. Croa was relieved. It seemed the maid wasn't lying. She considered it a victory. Suddenly, a maid burst into the bathroom. She was terrified, shouting that something terrible had happened. The third defense sector had been breached. Croa asked Piella what that meant and what had happened. Piella said she would find out. She went into the hallway and asked the maid if their security system hadn't predicted this. The girl explained that the defense line of the endless sea had collapsed. When asked if it had completely collapsed, the maid said not entirely, but the situation was critical. Croa thought that even if her marriage to Diello was just for show, she was still the one in charge here, and she couldn't ignore her duties at a time like this. It turned out that two groups of monsters had invaded the third sector. The first group of monsters that attacked the third sector was much larger than usual. The field commander, Roach, tried to hold off the larger group, but the second group of monsters was also surprisingly large, and the defense line collapsed in an instant. The maid confirmed that the number of monsters far exceeded the troops stationed there. She added that according to the knights on site, several monster groups had merged. Croa remembered something from the original novel. Monster activity near the endless sea was unstable. But as she recalled, there weren't any specific details. The protagonist also wondered how a maid, not a knight, would know so much about the situation on the battlefield. After all, maids were usually just told about these things. She noticed that it seemed all the knights and servants on this floor were saying the same thing. Piella said the last line of defense held and asked how they did it and if reinforcements had arrived. The maid said that Roach, the guy who messed up, took full responsibility and charged into the monster horde. While he was on his rampage, the defense line was rebuilt and held, and reinforcements were on their way. Croa asked why everyone was calling him the guy who messed up since he sacrificed himself to fulfill his duty. The protagonist was angry that instead of respecting Roach's sacrifice, everyone was taking it for granted. Piella said he didn't do his job properly in the first place. She also pointed out that if he hadn't sacrificed himself to buy time, he would have received a much harsher punishment according to Arsenta's code. Piella noticed Croa's surprise and guessed she hadn't seen anything like this in Allo's. so she found it strange. Piella explained that in Arsenta, there's a strict code of conduct, with the main principle being what you absolutely must or must not do. Croa remembered that in the original novel, this was the first thing mentioned about Arsenta. In Arsenta, if you don't do your job, you're still considered a failure, even if you give your life. The book said that anyone who proves their loyalty to the family head can use the family's power. But a family's power depends on the head's ability, and Diello was the strongest Arsenta head ever, and even without a chosen one, his power was truly overwhelming. That's why the Knight Roach was able to stop so many monsters with Arsenta's power in a glorious sacrifice. Croa thought that even if he gave his life to stop some monsters, he didn't do it right, which meant if he didn't complete his mission fully or didn't act according to the code, it was as if he had done nothing at all. Piella commented that the future Duchess was adapting quickly to their harsh rules. The protagonist realized that Diello was deliberately making himself look weak in order to plan for the future. She made a mental note that the harsh customs of the Arsenta family also played a part in this. She also guessed that this was even more difficult for him, due to his kind nature clashing with the cruel reality. Meanwhile, Diello received a report that Roach had died from Arsenta's power going out of control. He found that the knight's body was beyond repair and ordered him to be buried right in front of the endless sea. He was also told that Croa had heard what happened and asked why Roach was being called a sinner. She seemed a bit surprised, but Diello calmly accepted the information. He then told his subordinate he could leave. The Duke thought to himself that they now needed a new commander for the third sector. The thought made him let out a short, suppressed laugh, after which he thought, "What the hell am I supposed to do now?" Croa thought that the engagement ceremony was over and wondered when she could fully start playing her role as the wedding was fast approaching. Just then, Piella knocked on the door. Croa told her to come in. The maid asked if Croa was done with her refreshments. After getting an affirmative answer, she pushed in a huge pile of documents. The protagonist asked suspiciously what these were. Piella explained that it was all material about the businesses Arsenta regulated, so it would take a long time to go through everything. Croa was completely caught off guard and blurted out that she was just a guest here, that she didn't need to know Arsenta's deep secrets, and frankly, she didn't want to. The maid insisted that she needed to know and began to clear the documents on the table. She explained that the lady of the house was not only responsible for gathering circulating intelligence, but also for managing the family's public image and what happens behind the scenes. Croa was fuming inside, thinking Diello must have forgotten she was an imposter and would be out of here once the real deal showed up. She was frustrated that this guy was too nice and too trusting. The girl asked Piella if she was okay with this, hoping for some support. But to her disappointment, Piella agreed that Croa needed to be trained and suggested starting with the Southern Business Investments. Guests were touring the buildings specially constructed for the wedding, completely blown away. They asked how extravagant the ceremony would be, practically drooling in anticipation of the historic moment. Meanwhile, Duke Dello met with Duke Dello Arsenta. Duke Dello commented approvingly that the preparations were in full swing. He asked Diello to take care of his daughter, admitting she had many flaws. Diello replied that it went without saying. Duke Dello added that now that the marriage united their families, old grudges should be forgotten, and asked him to love his daughter as a cherished wife. Diello again assured him not to worry. Duke Dello said his goodbyes until they met again. Soon, Diello returned the sentiment, but when no one was looking, the Duke smiled. The guests expressed their eagerness to see the bride and groom together. The arrival of Duke Dello was announced. One guest congratulated Duke Dello on a fantastic alliance. Another commented that it couldn't get any better than this. Diello politely thanked them for their concern, but excused himself. He said he had to step away for a moment, then plopped down on a sofa. Water came flooding in from out of nowhere, but hey, that's the Dello style. The guests went wild seeing this. They also noted how cool the lights looked reflecting in the canals and thought it was absolutely fantastic. The master of ceremonies announced that everything was ready for the entrance of the bride and groom. Croa looked at everyone's faces and thought that no one suspected Diello's plan yet. She also noticed that the groom's family's seats were empty. This wasn't surprising. Croa guessed that, just like in the original novel, his parents had been eliminated. She wondered if Diello knew that Duke Dello was the one who did it. The girl felt he probably didn't know, or he wouldn't be marrying the daughter of the man who killed his parents. She called him a poor guy in her mind and promised herself that even if she wasn't strong, she would help her husband take down Duke Dello. Meanwhile, the wedding of Duke Diello Arsenta and Miss Croa was underway. The priest declared that from this moment until eternity, they would be one, and asked them to seal it with a kiss. At that moment, Croa noticed something important, a symbol of the Arsenta family that had been hidden until now, specifically the thing that suppressed the family head's power. She understood that if the family head removed this seal, his power would surge, but if someone else did it, that power would never be able to grow again. The girl realized that she and Diello had to protect this seal. Diello kissed his new bride, and then he whispered to Croa, asking if they should pretend to kiss more passionately, and she agreed. Then, the young man announced that this time he would take the lead, and the young man pulled his new wife into his arms and kissed her gently. Everyone present gasped. Then Diello thanked her for agreeing to marry him, and Croa replied that everything was perfect today. After the wedding ceremony and all the celebrations, the newlyweds hopped into their carriage. The guests also took their leave, wishing the couple a happy honeymoon. Diello and Croa set off. The heroine commented that the wedding went smoothly, calling it a complete success. She also said that the most important thing now was that her chastity could be preserved for him. The young man noticed this and became very flustered. The girl comforted her husband, telling him not to worry and explaining that they would only hold hands tonight. Upon arriving at the villa, Croa expressed her admiration, saying the place was wonderful and noted the wealth of the Arsenta family. After all, they had built a separate building just for the wedding and now a villa for the honeymoon. Diello said she would like the view from above even more, and Croa eagerly replied that she couldn't wait to see it. The young man suggested they go up now. Croa and Diello were immersed in a magnificent view where the ocean met the forest, and they both found it incredible. Croa asked if she remembered correctly that this place was on the border of Arsenta and Alos, and Diello confirmed it. The young man then suggested they have breakfast here together tomorrow morning, and Croa agreed, promising to take care of the arrangements. A maid reported that Croa's things had been packed. She knew some of the maids were from the Alos house, and that they would likely be watching them for the next 3 days. Croa suggested they rest for a bit before looking around the estate, and Diello agreed, saying it was a good idea. The girl understood that they needed to act like a couple in love for anyone who might be watching them. Croa complained that it was tiring to be watched all day, and Diello said he could indeed feel the stares. The heroine noted that the villa, though hastily built, was quite large and spacious. Diello hadn't expected to wander around the villa for so long. That evening, Diello suggested a drink. Croa happily agreed, saying that if someone offers you a drink, you have to drink it. The girl said they needed to keep up appearances until her one true love arrived. The young man agreed. She then tasted the wine, found it sweet and fragrant, and asked for another glass. Diello poured her some more. Croa drank it happily and then suggested they have another. But Diello replied that, unfortunately, she had drunk the last bottle and said it was time to rest, so they went to bed. Lying in bed, Croa thought about how her one true love would arrive in 2 months. The girl couldn't give an exact date for her true love's arrival, as that would seem suspicious, so she basically said the contract was for a year, but she had to leave this place in 2 months. Just then, Diello noticed Croa's thoughtful expression and asked if something was wrong, but Croa immediately denied it, saying he was handsome and comparing his eyes to the sea. Croa was a bit flustered. To justify herself, she said that even if they weren't a real couple, she could say so because it was the truth. Diello replied that the Real Sea was much darker and deeper, but Croa said that, nevertheless, the sea was that color from a distance. Diello then agreed, and Croa said enthusiastically that they were having a rather nice and sincere honeymoon. Diello replied that he was glad Miss Croa liked it. The heroine protested that she was no longer a miss, but Diello still called her that. The heroine told Diello that to seem like a real couple, they needed to be at least a little closer, and she suggested practicing calling each other by their first names. Diello first addressed his young wife as Croa Alos, but she wondered why he added the last name, as it created distance, and asked him to just call her by her first name. Diello called out her name a bit shyly. Croa, for her part, said something like, "Awesome, that's the right answer, buddy." She then mentioned her promise about maintaining a chaste relationship with her husband, but said that to fool everyone watching, they had to spend the night together. Just like tonight. Then she admitted she wanted to ask him something. When Diello asked what it was, she whispered something in his ear. Diello asked if she was absolutely sure about this plan, and she said it was necessary. Croa then quoted the Arsenta principle which was basically either do it or don't, and she said that if you're going to do it, you have to go all out. So Diello gave in, saying, all right. A few seconds later, she cried out in pain. One day, the heroine was resting in a gazebo outside. Pilar brought the lady some low-rail tea, which was said to help with fatigue. Croa told the maid to also send some tea to his grace, mentioning that he was working in his study and must be tired. Croa breathed a sigh of relief that those annoying people from the Aloes house were leaving today, and she could finally rest a little. She told herself to just hold on a little longer. Suddenly, a child's scream echoed through the hall. The maids asked the lady what to do, and she told them to bring the child to her. When the crying child was brought over, Croa asked him why he was crying. The child tearfully replied that his mom was gone. The boy cried that she was just here, but now she's gone. Croa asked the maid if any of the staff had children, but she replied that the Argenta house definitely did not have servants with children. Croa tried to soothe the child, telling him not to cry, but he just kept screaming for his mom. Seeing the child so upset, the heroine decided to take him to find his mother herself. Pilar expressed her concern for her safety. The Duchess replied that everything was fine and that she trusted Aloes and Argenta. But in reality, Croa understood they had no reason to cause her trouble. She added that the maid shouldn't tell anyone, so as not to worry others. Because what could a child do, right? Pilar reluctantly agreed, but wanted to assign the Duchess a guard, just in case. As soon as this suggestion was made, the boy's cries rang out again. Croa noticed the child was scared and stressed, and, not wanting to waste time, decided to go quickly and alone. After a while, the heroine asked the boy if he had calmed down and felt better, but he just walked on quietly and composedly. Then he pointed somewhere. Croa asked if he saw his mom over there, but the child ignored the question again, simply pulling her silently in that direction. It was then that Croa realized he wasn't intimidated by the tight security and had come specifically for her. Now the girl understood that the reason for his appearance was most likely that this child would cause her trouble. However, Croa wasn't too worried, as she was sure someone was following her, like her maid. When they reached a deserted spot, the boy suddenly stopped and addressed the heroine as Croa Aloes. Seeing the mark on his hand, the girl guessed he was one of the watchers from the Aloes family. The little spy asked Croa if she had really spent the night with the Duke of Argenta. The heroine confirmed it, and the child then demanded proof. He needed anything that could serve as evidence that she had spent the night with the Duke of Argenta. Croa realized that thankfully she had asked Diello for a favor yesterday, and she began to hesitantly unbutton her blouse. The scene from that night flashed before her eyes. Why did it have to surface at this particular moment? She decided this was not the time to dwell on it. First, she needed to remain calm. She showed the little spy the mark on her neck and asked if that was enough. The child said he had seen all he needed to see. Just then, the child's mother appeared, calling out affectionately to her son. He ran to her, happy to see his mom. Croa thought to herself that she had arrived right on time. She admitted to herself that she had suspected they would come to check, but she hadn't expected it so soon. She compared this to the original work, in which the version of Croa, determined to deceive Diello, had indeed spent the night with him. But there was no scene in the novel where the Duchess had to prove this to anyone. The heroine remembered asking Diello that night if the mark was really there, and if it was clearly visible. Diello gently brushed her collarbone, confirming that the mark was indeed there. She could almost still feel the phantom of his lips on her skin. Croa wondered why these intrusive memories were invading her mind at this moment, and she couldn't help but question how Diello had managed to fake their wedding night so realistically. A little later, the Duke watched his new Duchess from the window as she was attended to by her maids. Just then, he suddenly recalled their conversation on their wedding night. She had insisted they needed to be prepared for anything and had asked him for a favor. Diello wondered if Croa somehow knew the Aloes would send someone to check on her. He figured she must know how sharp the Duke of Aloes was. He also considered the possibility that Croa might still be working for someone in the Aloes camp. The Duke thought to himself that the Argenta estate was secure from the outside. It was an insurmountable wall that guaranteed peace and safety within. Diego admitted to himself that he still couldn't fully trust Croa Aloes. Therefore, he decided to keep her within the Argenta estate for the time being. He thought that if she was truly one of the Aloes, she would have to act very carefully. But if she was here to help the Arsenta family, he hoped her proposal was sincere. That night, Croa thought carefully about everything that had happened, realizing that no matter how you looked at it, demanding proof was a bit much. The heroine wondered what kind of proof they were expecting. She also realized that showing up as a child who could use magic was a bit suspicious. Just then, Diego knocked on the door and asked if he could come in. Croa was surprised that he would be so polite as to knock before entering their room. So, of course, she said yes. The Duke apologized for not spending the day with his wife and for rushing off to the family estate on urgent business. The Duchess said it was fine, and since it was so urgent, the Diellos probably wouldn't suspect anything either. Croa added that it would have looked strange if she had entered the study, and that she had kept glancing at the door, playing the part of a sad bride desperately waiting for her husband to come down. Diego said he must have looked like a real bastard, since he hadn't even thought of coming down. The girl smiled smugly and said that at least the Duke of Allos wasn't left with the impression that this wasn't a marriage of love. Then Croa got back to business, talking about the Duke of Allos, and told Diego that he had checked for proof of the previous night before he left. Diego asked in surprise, "Croa, did you really think the Duke of Allos came to check for proof himself?" Croa retorted sharply that of course it wasn't him in person. Diello said with relief that he had almost misunderstood the Duke of Allos. Croa countered, "The Duke of Allos is still the enemy. What is there to misunderstand?" The girl then said that, regardless, thanks to this, they had passed the first hurdle. Diello asked her to clarify what she meant. In response, Croa pointed to the lily crest, the symbol of the Arsenta family, implying that this hurdle was a test from her family. Croa explained to Diello that the Duke of Allos was waiting for her to remove that lily. Apparently, the mark would fade depending on how Diello gave his sincerity and purity to his spouse. She clarified that there was no reason for it to disappear in the short term, not before her one true love appeared. Diello said he understood. Croa reassured him that everything would remain as it is until her one true love appeared. Then she said there was one thing they needed to clear up. Diello asked her to specify what it was. The heroine asked if he was sure no one in the Arsenta house knew their secret, pointing out that she knew Pilar, at least, was aware. Croa clarified that the maid wasn't stupid enough not to notice. The heroine asked sarcastically if it would be a problem for Diello if his partner was so good at messing things up. Diello agreed that Pilar knew. Croa then pressed Diello, asking who exactly she could trust in the Arsenta house. The young man replied that she didn't need to worry, that anyone who could access the 4th floor of the Arsenta house was a good person in his eyes. Croa asked in surprise, "So everyone from the Arsenta house who operates on the 4th floor knows?" Diello confirmed with a smile and told her not to worry about it. The heroine wondered how he could be so nonchalant. Diello explained that those with access to the 4th floor were the true people of Arsenta, and they could be trusted. The young man added that a true Arsenta person is well aware that betrayal is a foolish act. The Duke said he understood Croa's concerns, but once she got to know the people of Arsenta better, she would see things differently. He turned off the light and wished her good night. The next day, Pilar brought Croa a magical contract. This contract was to be signed by a member of the house who was about to move to another family. The maid explained that when someone belonging to the Arsenta family leaves, they sign a magical contract. This way, he guarantees that he cannot reveal any family secrets. The Duchess's job was to get the signature of the person in question. Croa read the contract, noting that the family head's name was on it, so that must be important. The girl wondered if it was appropriate to show something like this to her, a mere second in command, even though she was married to the Duke. The contract stipulated that from the moment of signing, the person leaving Arsenta service could not utter a single word about Arsenta anywhere. If he tried to talk about Arsenta, the fire of the family head would personally, let's just say, he and everyone around him would not have a good time. Croa asked Pilar in surprise about the fire of the family head and whether it was right to draw up such a contract. The maid replied that it didn't happen often, but it did occasionally, and she had rarely seen anyone violate the terms. Croa understood this was an Arsenta tradition, but it seemed strange that the gentle and timid Diello would personally enforce this contract. Despite her doubts, Croa told Pilar that they would go see the person who was waiting right away. And so, our heroine followed the maid. Croa and Pila arrived at a room where a man named Mirda was already waiting for them. The maid introduced him as the servant who would be signing the contract. Mirda greeted the Duchess politely, saying it was an honor to meet her. Croa saw a quill and a dagger on the table and asked in alarm, "Where is the ink?" Then it dawned on her that the contract required blood to be signed. Pila told Mirda that he was well aware of how this contract was to be signed. Mirda said, with bitter irony, that he never thought he would be the one writing this contract. The maid said it was time to stop talking nonsense and get down to business. The man grabbed a dagger and slit his arm. The heroine watched, a mixture of disgust and pity on her face, and gasped. Croa confirmed her suspicions, noting that, just as she thought, blood was being used as ink. The heroine thought to herself, that must hurt like hell. After Mirda finished writing, he informed the lady. She praised him for a job well done. Then Pila turned to Mirda and said that she was sure, of course, that this wouldn't happen. But if he ever broke that oath, he would find himself back here facing the consequences listed in the agreement. She told him to remember his promise. Mirda replied that yes, he would certainly remember. After the contract was signed, Mirda thanked Croa for witnessing it. He said that even for a brief meeting, it was an honor to see her. The Duchess asked him why he was leaving Argenta. Mirda replied that his wife's parents were elsewhere, and she wanted to spend her final days with them. Croa said she understood, wished Mirda only good news, and bid him farewell. The man thanked her. Pila said she would escort Mirda to his carriage, and Croa told her to see him off properly. Alone, the heroine wondered if this was clearly some kind of private matter for Argenta, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was getting involved in something she shouldn't. The girl asked herself if this contract was the reason Diego was so sure the people of Argenta wouldn't betray him. But then she wondered, who exactly were the people of Argenta? Later, Pila told the Duchess that Mirda had originally served Diello personally. Croa thought that if he served Diello directly, their relationship must have been close. She guessed that Diello must have gone through something serious to order such a contract. Croa then headed to her husband's office to give him the magical contract signed by Mirda. She knocked on his office door, and he told her to come in. Seeing his wife, Diello was quite surprised that she had come in person and that she had brought the contract earlier than expected, so the young man thanked her. Just then, Croa noticed a dagger in Diello's desk as well, very similar to the one used to sign the contract. The Duke used that dagger to do the same thing Mirda had done. He made a cut, dipped the pen in blood instead of ink, and signed the paper. Then he sealed the contract with a flame. Croa told Diello that she heard Mirda had served him personally until recently. The young man confirmed this, adding that it was a real shame. Croa reminded Diello that just yesterday they were worried about potential traitors, yet he said there would be none. She explained that it's not easy to commit betrayal. You need to be sure everything will go smoothly. The girl pointed out that Mirda served Diello personally, so she didn't think it would be a problem. Diello agreed with her, thanked her for her concern, and said he would see her tonight. Croa replied that Diello should take good care of himself. Croa thought to herself that they really looked like a newlywed couple. After the Duchess left, the Duke glanced at the contract, lost in thought for a moment, and then summoned Sir Rick. Diello ordered the knight to watch Mirda, but then the Duke changed his mind and ordered him to watch those who had been bought by Cartier. The Duke explained that being watched by Argenta would keep them on their toes. If they tried to contact Cartier, he was to be told immediately. The Duke said he would deal with them personally. Sir Rick confirmed, understood. Now that the Duke had dispatched Rick, the head of intelligence, Mirda's every move was completely within Argenta's sight. He recalled Croa's words with a hint of irony. To betray someone, you have to be very sure you can get away with it. Diello agreed with his wife in his heart. People don't usually stab you in the back unless they think they can get away with it. But the problem was, they thought they could, and they were dead wrong. They thought his current situation of being married to a fake chosen one made him vulnerable. They thought this was the perfect time to root out the traitors in our ranks, because they mistakenly believed he was weak. He reminded himself that the rules of Argenta do not tolerate betrayal. A messenger burst into Diello's office with an urgent report, saying there was unusual activity in the 4th zone of the Endless Sea. His Grace couldn't believe his ears and asked again in surprise, "Is the problem really with the 4th zone?" The messenger confirmed it, adding that Commander Radius was on the scene and requesting his orders. The Duke was shocked that his uncle was involved and ordered him to be brought here immediately. Croa asked Pila if Diego had left because of an emergency. Pila confirmed it, adding that this time, the trouble was in the 4th zone. Croa clarified. So we're talking about the endless sea, and thought to herself that he must still be worried about the last major attack. Pila agreed that might be the reason, adding that although the Duke appeared gentle on the outside, he was born with the power of a true family head. The heroine thought to herself, why am I so worried about him? Croa asked Pila if Diego had really left without a word, commenting that it was a bit unexpected. Pila confirmed that yes, he had rushed to the scene. Croa said she understood and hoped her husband would return safely. Then Pila brought the last document to be signed. The Duchess glanced at it and asked, what's this about a shadow shelter? Pila explained that the shadow was aid provided to the families of those who sacrificed themselves working for Argenta. She added that in this case, the Roa family, the family of a criminal, would be the subject of the shadow shelter. The Duke had ordered that they be given special care. The heroine remembered that Roa had bravely defended Argenta in the final battle of the third zone of the Endless Sea. At the time, she felt everyone was too harsh on him, but apparently there was more to it. She noted that this was so like the Duke and asked, what kind of support do families under the shadow shelter receive? Pila explained that not only do they have the right to live on Argenta land and in Argenta buildings, but they are also guaranteed a life free from financial worries. So, whether you just live on their land or a true family member, the loyalty to the Argenta family is quite high. Croa admitted the benefits were indeed generous, and yes, being part of the Argenta family certainly had its advantages. Then she asked, what are the conditions? What does it take to join the Argenta house? Pila replied that the main thing was to show you have a special talent. The maid had heard that people from other families also had abilities related to their elements, and asked, what about the Aloes house? Croa said that in the Aloes house, most of the mansion staff could control water, but the atmosphere was a bit different, and you could find work in the mansion even without an ability. The heroine added that, moreover, she had never heard of any magical contracts or shadow support, so the girl thought the shadow system might be unique to the Argenta family. Perhaps that was why the atmosphere in the Argenta house was different from other families. Suddenly, the heroine heard a knock on the door. She had a bad feeling and told them to come in. A knight appeared in the room and apologized to the lady, saying they needed support in the fourth zone. The heroine was very surprised, as her husband was on his way there. She asked if they really still needed reinforcements. The knight said yes, adding that the Duke himself had ordered them to request help. The heroine realized she had a strange feeling about this. In the original novel, this was the very incident where Diego's only uncle, Radius Argenta, died in a magical accident. And this was the beginning of the crisis for Argenta and Diego. In the book, this happened after Croa Aloes married Diego Argenta, right before her one true love arrived at the mansion. The heroine asked how much support they needed. The subordinate reported that the battle was dragging on and they would need to clear the rubble on site for some time. So they needed enough reinforcements to end things quickly. The maid chimed in happily, saying that this was already good news. The heroine thought to herself that they clearly didn't know the situation on site had severely worsened. She mused that the experienced Commander Radius couldn't possibly die, especially with Diallo's support, if it weren't for one thing. In the story, the Argenta family never expected a monster that used water magic to appear. So Radius had no choice but to make the ultimate sacrifice to stop the madness. Thanks to Radius's heroic act, the fourth zone was protected. If things proceeded as they were, everything would follow the original's tragic script. Radius Argenta was not only Diallo's only blood relative, but also a key figure in the Argenta family's power. The heroine told herself that she absolutely could not let him die, and of course, it wasn't out of any pitiful sentiment. Besides, it was crucial for her own future safety. The heroine then gave a sharp order to gather and dispatch reinforcements immediately. She added that the scale needed to be as large as possible. A frustrated Croa thought to herself that only she knew about the water monster, and she had almost let slip something she shouldn't have, which could have caused a whole lot of trouble. As for the size of the squad, she felt it was best to let the knights decide. So the protagonist agreed to send reinforcements. But in exchange, she requested a security escort, as she was also a member of the Aloes family. Both the knight and the maid were surprised and asked her what she meant, but she did not answer. Suddenly, the tea in the cup and the water in the vase began to rise as if stirred by a whirlwind. Everyone in the room was terrified. Croa thought to herself that if even Diello needed support, the situation must be much worse than they had imagined. Croa thought that that since it was a coastal area, shouldn't the Alloy's family, who controlled the waters, be the ones to step in? The maid promised to report immediately after the meeting. The Duchess agreed. Alone in her room, Croa contemplated the future of the Argenta family, her husband, and herself. The girl decided that she had to prevent this tragedy from happening. But the protagonist did not know where Diello was now, nor what he was facing. Diello began to truly hate the sea, because from a distance, the shimmering ocean was damnably beautiful. But when he saw how the local monsters continuously threatened the land, and how Arsen's sacrifice was replayed time and again, it all sickened him. Diego flashed back to a childhood memory, the entire room filled with his sobs and cries. Suddenly, Diego's uncle entered the room, but the boy was still wailing. Between sobs, he haltingly confessed to his uncle that he hated the sea, explaining that because of the monsters there, he had lost everything. His uncle sternly told him to shut up, explaining that many people wanted to see Diello fall and that he needed to be strong. He also said that his nephew must get used to sacrifice and remember not to trust anyone. His uncle admonished him to remember from now on that in order to survive, Diello had to become cold and ruthless, and ordered him not to look at just one member of Argenta, but at Argenta as a whole. The boy started crying again and threw himself into his uncle's arms. Diego confessed that he had been thinking about that conversation all day, probably because he had been sent to the place his uncle once commanded. He shared that he had a bad feeling about this. Deep down, the lad really hoped his intuition was wrong. The knights fought for their lives, giving it their all, but they were exhausted. The knights thought in despair that this was the end of everything. Suddenly, the Duke himself charged into the fray, shouting that the flames of Argenta were still burning. The knights' morale soared, and they cheered for their leader's presence on the battlefield. His Grace the Duke ordered everyone to hold the line. The knights were thrilled because the move had worked, and the monsters were retreating. A knight blurted out in shock that it was impossible for monsters using water magic to appear here. The number of monsters was much greater than before. The Duke drew his sword again and swung it, releasing a torrent of flames. But a second later, the young man realized in horror that his magic had missed its target. From this distance, Diello couldn't break through that wall. It seemed the intelligence about fire-wielding monsters appearing in the desert protected by Cardinal was true. It was said that the head of the Cardinal family, who controlled the wind, had quickly suppressed that monster with magic. But Diello, who had not yet awakened Pharaoh, could only hold them off. To make matters worse, even if he requested reinforcements from the domain, it would be useless, as he hadn't considered how much the monsters would have mutated. Commander Radius admitted it was his fault for only requesting a small squad, as the assessment hadn't taken the monsters' adaptability into account. Suddenly, the commander announced his decision to sacrifice himself to stop the monsters. The Duke thought that if his uncle did something crazy, they could at least minimize their losses. But those words would be his last. The commander held his ground, pleading for his leader's permission. This is the worst, the leader thought. Suddenly, a woman's scream cut through the air. It was Croa, who had appeared with reinforcements. The protagonist unleashed her power and shouted to her husband that she would stop the sea. The result stunned everyone. The monsters vanished, and the sea seemed to freeze, or rather, Croa was controlling it. The girl had suspected her abilities would grow stronger, near the source of her power, but she never imagined they would become this strong. Before setting out, the protagonist had been practicing controlling her powers. The girl felt that the more she used this ability, the easier it became to wield. It turned out that Croa could even consciously create shapes. She mentally praised herself for practicing in her spare time. She noted that the original Croa's power was weak, but the current protagonist was completely different. Undeniably, after she took over the body, the ability had changed as well. The lady was informed that everything was ready for departure. Croa was very excited because everything was going according to plan, and far more people had come than expected. The heroine ordered the entire force to advance to the 4th district. Incidentally, the feeling of riding a horse was quite familiar. It seemed the original Croa not only had experience riding, but was actually quite talented at MY Lady. We'd just been notified that they will be arriving at the 4th district soon. The heroine knew that if her future plans were to be realized, today's battle had to be won. Even so, she had serious doubts about how much help she could actually be. Furthermore, the closer they got to the front lines, the more the blood of alloys boiled within her. And so, the protagonist arrived on the scene and began to tear the monsters apart. The knights watched, completely stunned, as the Duchess single-handedly controlled the massive tidal wave. They held onto the hope that she would protect them. And Croa admitted to herself that even she was surprised by her own power. Even this close to the sea, the heroine hadn't expected her abilities to get such a huge boost. The girl wondered just how strong the other members of the Aloys family were, and if the next family head, Peniz Alos, awakened Pharaoh, he would display a completely different level of power. For a moment, the girl couldn't help but think that maybe she wouldn't end up like she did in the original story. Wielding such power now, how could they not choose her as the next head of the family? Lost in thought, she almost missed the monster's attack. It was time to raise her power again. Diello watched his wife, thinking to himself that she held considerable power. It made him wonder just how strong the Duke of Aloys was. Then, the lad asked Croa, where did the monster go? Did it just disappear? But Croa said, no, it's hiding. But as the waves grew larger, the girl shouted, I see it. It turned out to be hiding under the waves. Hiding was useless. She knew this was her chance, and she had to give it her all. But no matter how hard she tried, it wasn't enough. Croa began to doubt if she could win with a single blow. This monster controls water. We clearly need powerful firepower. Just then, Diello turned to Croa and offered to lend her a hand. The lad unleashed a torrent of flames at the monster and completely annihilated it. Everyone around cheered wildly, celebrating that they had finally succeeded. The Duke proudly and loudly declared the water monster dead, then ordered the battlefield to be cleared. Croa was thinking that such undeveloped potential was much stronger than she had imagined. And then there was Diello. But suddenly, the protagonist's train of thought was interrupted as everything began to spin. Diello called out to his wife, managing to catch her, and anxiously asked what was wrong. Getting no answer, the young man got a little angry and asked Croa what on earth she was doing here. The girl explained that she was worried because she didn't need an injured partner, and she also wanted to help a little. Diego thanked Croa. The girl silently added in her mind that with her husband's personality, she felt he might not have been able to fight properly. Perhaps Diego wasn't the person she thought he was. A while later, His Grace the Duke sat by his exhausted wife's bedside, gently stroking her hair. The vivid memories of the recent battle flooded Diello's mind. He remembered being told that the battlefield had been cleared, and in response, he had ordered them to leave. His subordinate suggested escorting the lady, but he refused, with the Duke declaring he would take her himself. On the way to the palace, Diello secretly noted that a strange scent was making him dizzy. It was the scent of the sea, which the young man had once hated so much, but now it was like sweet dew quenching a thirst. Sitting by his wife's bedside now, Diego concluded in his heart that everything was happening because of her. After countless betrayals and the death of his parents, the young man had tried hard not to develop feelings for anyone. He always had to be cold and ruthless, never shying away from anyone's death. But what if there was one person who could remain unaffected in this sea of death and could fearlessly stand against it? It seemed that person was Croa Aloys. When the protagonist woke up, she immediately recognized the familiar ceiling and realized she was back at the manor, safe and sound. Croa could barely lift a finger, feeling as if all the moisture in her body had evaporated and her mouth was parched. It was said that when all three families used their powerful abilities, each family suffered different side effects. Just then, a maid entered the room and, noticing that her mistress was awake, offered to call for a doctor. But the Duchess refused the doctor and instead asked to be told if Lord Radius was all right. The maid double-checked, asking if the lady was really worried about the commander of the 4th District. The Duchess wanted to know if all the troops involved in the battle were all right and what our losses were. The maid said that Lord Radius and the troops of the 4th District had only sustained minor injuries. She also added that Lord Radius had already come to see you and then returned directly to the 4th District. The Duchess was surprised that Lord Radius had already visited and asked how long she had been unconscious. The maid replied that you had been unconscious for about a day and a half, which surprised her. The maid told her that thanks to her support in the battle, the losses in the 4th District were minimal. The Duchess sighed in relief and said, "Thank goodness. That means I was helpful." Then she asked the maid to tell the Duke she was fine. The maid protested that he had ordered a doctor to be called as soon as the Duchess woke up, so the Duchess reluctantly agreed. A short while later, the maid announced the arrival of a doctor named Neas. The doctor greeted her, saying, "For the glory of Argenta and requested permission to examine her, to which she agreed. Sir Neos examined her and said that she just needed to rest well and would recover soon, as there was nothing seriously wrong. He also told her to call him immediately if she felt even the slightest bit unwell. She agreed, thanked him, and promised to be careful. The doctor left, praising Argenta. Alone again, Croa wondered why she kept hearing about Argenta so much lately. Soon, there was another knock on the Duchess's door, asking if they could enter. Without looking up, the Duchess said, "Come in." After receiving permission, the guests entered and greeted her in unison, praising Argenta. In that moment, she saw a group of smiling knights and maids standing before her, and she too said, "Praise Argenta." The protagonist thought to herself, "Is this camaraderie from battle?" Everyone was saying, "Praise Argenta," as if it were some kind of inside joke. Pilar suggested that it was less about camaraderie and more about what a deep impression the lady had left on Argenta. Croa asked her to explain why. The maid pointed out that even for the people of Argenta, going through all that for Argenta was a remarkable feat. And you, my lady, threw yourself into it even more recklessly than the members of Argenta themselves. Now the people of Argenta believe that the lady has passed her first test. The maid added that even if her ability wasn't fire-based, she believed the lady had passed the trial. The Duchess asked what that meant. Pilar explained that it was the trial to become a true member of Argenta. You have to survive there without a weapon, using only your flames. If the subject dies, their power becomes part of the patriarchs. But if they survive, they become a true member of Argenta. The lady thought to herself that it was just another live or die situation. On the other hand, Croa understood the kind of invisible bond felt among the members of Argenta. Then, she thought about how she didn't know when she would be leaving this place. The thought of becoming a part of Argenta filled the protagonist with a strange feeling. Nevertheless, her decision to leave would not change. After all, the real pharaoh would be coming soon, so it was time to start preparing. Croa called a servant and ordered her to bring a map of the continent. The protagonist made a mental note that deep inland, there was a place where she could live a carefree and comfortable life. Of course, that was Daisy Grove. Right now, it was just a forest full of wild animals and monsters. But in a few years, a huge canal would be built along the river surrounding the forest. The girl decided she needed to focus on real estate. That was the future, and buying now seemed like a surefire investment. However, there was one problem. She didn't have the funds to buy it in advance. The girl was tormented by the question of where to get the money. Suddenly, a breathless Diello burst into the room. He blurted out that he was worried sick about his beloved and wanted to rush to her side as soon as possible. But there were always one problem or another on the coast. Croa asked if he was sorry for not being there when she woke up. The guy said yes and thanked her. She said it was fine. She knew he was busy. Diego asked if he had misheard from Dr. Neos and if she was really okay. She explained that it was her first time using her power, so her body had gone into shock, but she was fine now. He pointed out that she had really pushed herself too hard, but he admitted that if it weren't for her, many would have paid the price. Thanks to Croa, many people survived. Diego added that he should have told his wife not to do that again, but her power was too tempting, and he was afraid he wouldn't be able to stop her if it happened again. He ended by asking what he should do. Croa replied that she would continue to help as they were allies until they got what they wanted from the Alloys family. Diello thanked his wife for something and told her that the Duke of Alloys had sent a letter. To her surprise question about the letter, he explained that he felt she should see it too, so he brought it. In the letter, as promised, the Duke expressed his desire to meet with Croa. The heroine guessed that the purpose of the letter was most likely to check on the progress of the plan to, corrupt Diello Arsenta. Croa commented that with so many plans already made for her future, this was just what she expected from the Duke of Alloys. Then she remembered that the Duke of Alloys had set conditions for this fake marriage, one of which was particularly unfair. The Alloys family would receive half the income from Argenta's important mines and farmlands as the Duchess's living expenses. Realizing this, Croa was delighted to find she had found a source of funding. Diego asked the girl what was wrong with her. She replied with a smile that it was nothing in particular. Then the guy asked what was on her lap and recognized it as a map. Croa confirmed it was a map of the continent and explained that she had Pilar bring it. The Duchess said that when she leaves Argenta, she wants to live near Daisy Grove. Those words hit Diego hard. Noticing his reaction, she asked him why he was so upset. He repeated her words, asking what she meant by leaving Argenta someday. The guy didn't want to believe what he was hearing and tried to change the subject, suggesting she go to sleep first. He said he needed to finish some work. Croa agreed to rest, mentioning that her husband was always working so hard. Diello walked down the hallway, Croa's words replaying in his mind. When she leaves Argenta, she wants to live near Daisy Grove. He deduced that her choice of that location was related to the large river that flowed near the forest. He considered the possibility, however unlikely, that she planned to use the river's power to wipe out everyone in the Alloys family and then face Argenta alone. But Diello immediately dismissed the thought, concluding that Croa wasn't that reckless. Just then, the guy asked himself the big question, why did she want to leave? But a voice inside snapped that he was only seeing one side of things. Argenta would not let Croa, who had learned so much about Argenta's secrets, live. The guy suddenly realized that once the real pharaoh appeared, Croa would be useless, and they wouldn't let her retire peacefully, but would eliminate her directly. The thought of her being disposed of like that made his heart clench. He wondered if he would really allow that to happen, especially since he himself had considered doing it. Diego admitted he was wavering. Was it just because she was his only true ally? Or because she had saved so many of Argenta's people? Or could it be that he actually cared for Croa? He mulled it over, wondering if it was just her useful ability that was making him hesitate. He silently whispered the name of the woman on his mind. Then his thoughts turned in another direction. If the pharaoh's arrival was delayed, he thought, maybe things could stay as they are. Diego even began to think that might be for the best. A thought about Croa formed in his mind. She was too good for the Alloys family. Not just good, but a shining star. This thought sparked a new wave of regret that she wasn't the real pharaoh. It would be so much better if she could actually be the real pharaoh. In their farewell before her trip, the protagonist assured her husband that she would return safely. She said she was good at playing roles and told him not to worry. Diego said he understood and would be waiting for her every second. And so, the protagonist arrived at the Duke of Alloys' manor. The Duke greeted Croa and invited her inside. He said he was glad to see her, and Croa returned the greeting. When he asked how she was doing, she told him she was enjoying a happy married life, thanks to his benevolence. The Duke seemed pleased, but then said that while he was happy to welcome her, he felt the pleasantries were over. He suggested they go to the living room, where some refreshments were prepared, so they could talk privately. Croa agreed. She inwardly scoffed at his hypocrisy, wondering what he was plotting this time. Meanwhile, the Duke addressed everyone, suggesting they give a father and daughter some space to reunite. The man asked if it would be too much to ask for her escort not to follow them. He feigned surprise, asking if Argenta was really so stingy as to deny a father and daughter a moment alone. He expressed indignation, implying they thought he would do something bad to his own daughter. The servants obediently complied and bowed. Having gotten his way, the Duke noted with satisfaction that this was more like it. He ordered the escorts to wait outside the manor until their conversation was over. The servants watched their mistress walk away with sadness and anger. And so, the Duke asked Croa how things were progressing, mentioning that he'd heard they were inseparable. Croa reported that she had succeeded in staying in the same room with Diello. The Duke was surprised and asked if the maid from Alloys was in the reception room. Croa explained that the problem was that Diello Argenta was too reserved. The girl had a bad feeling about this. She pointed out that her husband was very simple by nature and explained that because of her background, he needed time to open up to her. The Duke asked in disbelief if she wasn't trying at all. Croa replied that of course she was trying, but she reminded him that simply taking his virginity wasn't enough. To this, the Duke dryly confirmed that he knew that. Croa explained that until Diello opened his heart to her, he wouldn't want anything to do with her, and opening his heart was a necessary condition to unseal his powers. She added that it would therefore take time. The Duke scoffed, asking if she couldn't have figured that out sooner. He insinuated that physical intimacy wasn't everything and directly asked if she was bad in bed. Croa thought in disgust that she already knew he was scum. But seeing him now, I finally understand that he's even worse than I imagined. Croa felt the heavy air pressing in, realizing she was about to suffocate. The Duke implied she hadn't understood his instructions to seduce the lad at all costs. She tried to whisper that she was doing her best, but her father simply ignored her. He asked sarcastically if Diego was already impotent at his age. The protagonist thought, he's not just cold-blooded, he's a real bastard. Croa cursed him in her mind for being despicable and shameless, and began to explain that things weren't as simple as they seemed. She said that Diego claimed he couldn't spend the night with her because his heart just wasn't in physical intimacy. Croa mentally apologized to Diello for lying, explaining that she had to save herself first. She continued, saying that if she forced him to share a bed, it would only make him shut his heart completely. So she was trying to get close to him little by little, and she had an idea for it. The Duke asked her what the idea was. Croa then explained to the Duke that to win a young man's heart, you have to do something. But this family was practically penniless, aside from the living expenses set aside for the Duchess. So she asked if at least 1/10 of that money could be transferred to her account. Unexpectedly, the Duke agreed, finding it reasonable, and approved the transfer of some funds to her. But he attached a condition. She had better come back with better results next time, and he wanted to make sure she understood. The girl promised she understood and breathed a sigh of relief, realizing she had succeeded. Now the money problem was solved. As she left, she thought, that was a close call, but I'll always find a way. Suddenly, the Duke called out to her and reminded her about the name Diello Arsenta tattooed on her back. He said he was going to make that guy's face bloom. The attendants waited quietly by the carriage for the Duchess. After a moment, the protagonist walked slowly towards the carriage, barely able to take a step. She told her maid they were leaving immediately, and the maid noticed her pale complexion. Pilar relayed the order to the coachman and asked if the Duchess was all right, but Croa didn't answer. Feeling extremely unwell, she collapsed into her seat. The maid screamed in alarm, their fear intensifying when they saw blood seeping from under her dress. Seeing their mistress lose consciousness, the maids began to call her name, begging her to wake up. Croa replied that she was fine and it would pass soon. Pilar asked what had happened at the Alloy's manor. Croa just gasped in pain, and the maid politely requested permission to check her mistress's back. After getting her consent, she began to check. Seeing the state of her back, Pilar asked in horror, "My lady, were you this badly injured the last time you came back as well?" Croa confirmed it and reminded her, "You know the Duke's name is a fake tattoo, right?" Pilar agreed, but said that even so, this was too severe and cruel. The maid promised to administer first aid right away, adding, "I'll tell the coachman to go slower to make you more comfortable, my lady, even if it means we'll be later getting back to the manor." Croa thanked her. As darkness fell, Diego looked at his watch irritably, thinking, "Why is my wife so late? Did something happen?" Suddenly, His Grace the Duke was informed that his wife had arrived. "Thus she's late," Diello said impatiently. Seeing her in the hallway, the young man asked if something had happened. She looked terrible, trembling like a leaf, and asked him in return why he wasn't asleep yet. Despite her forced smile, Diello noticed. He guessed that she had carved the mark on herself again. When she asked in surprise how he knew, Diello said he just guessed and insisted that the wound needed to be properly cleaned. Croa replied that she had already taken care of it, and he didn't need to worry, it would heal eventually. But Diello wouldn't let it go, demanding that the wound be properly cleaned again this time. Croa finally relented. She said she would be grateful if he would. Diello thought to himself, her smiling face after all she'd been through was driving him crazy. As Diello began to clean the wound, Croa cried out in pain. He told her to speak up if it hurt too much. So Croa said with a hint of sarcasm, "Can you make it not hurt?" The guy just shook his head, "No." "Then can you hurry up?" She snapped. "This is a bit rough." He promised, "I'll try to finish quickly." Croa groaned. "It hurts like hell just to straighten my arm." She pleaded, "Please, just hurry, okay?" Then, Diallo's eyes widened as he saw the bruises. The heroine felt him freeze. "Hey," she asked, "are you okay? What's wrong?" He stammered, "It's nothing, nothing. I'll be done in a moment." Croa was relieved to hear the bandaging was done. Diello announced, "All done." Croa thanked him, and he replied, "You're welcome." Then he told her, "All right, take off your clothes and go to sleep." This caught her off guard. He explained, "Even with the thick padding on your back, the friction from your clothes will make the pain worse. It's better to take them off." Croa agreed that it made sense, but she still felt a little strange about lying together naked. She wondered if she was overreacting, being so nervous in front of this innocent man. Seeing her hesitation, the young man told her not to worry about anything. Diello reminded her of their agreement, explaining that they would only hold hands. Croa seemed to understand and bravely tossed her robe aside. The young couple lay there, looking at each other. Suddenly, Diello called her name. When she responded, the young man said that it seemed this wouldn't work. This surprised Croa, and she asked anxiously what won't work. Suddenly, Diello took a pillow from behind Croa and handed it to her, which confused her a little. He said he thought she would be uncomfortable sleeping on her side, so he suggested she hug a pillow. Croa laughed a little awkwardly, admitting she thought he was implying something else. Then she thanked him for being so considerate. He also told her to pull up the blanket, guessing it would get cold. He asked with a mischievous smile if she was startled again, and Croa told Diello not to tease her about it. The man took his wife's hand, called her name, and wished her good night. Croa wished him good night as well. When she woke up in the morning, the heroine found her husband still fast asleep. She was surprised he was still sleeping so soundly, saying it was unlike him and thinking he must be exhausted. Just then, a maid peeked into the room, but the heroine gestured for her not to make a sound or come in. The heroine wondered if something had happened, but she then remembered that today was the shadow transport day, which required final approval. The final approval for the shadow transport was just inspecting the cargo, and while it took time, wasn't difficult. She thought that since they had treated her injuries so well, she should do something to repay them. The girl noticed that Diello had been very careful when treating her wounds with medicine, and the pain was less than she had expected. She figured that if she took good care of it, the wound might heal quickly. When a maid asked how she was feeling, Croa thanked her for her concern and said she felt much better than yesterday. Then she announced that today was the final approval day for the shadow transport, and she would handle it in place of the Duke. The maid asked if Croa was really going to jump into work right away and suggested she get some rest. But Croa refused. She explained that if she rested, it would seem like something really had happened at the Alosa estate yesterday. The heroine added that if you're going to lie, you have to lie thoroughly. The maid agreed, but asked her to say something immediately if things became difficult. The Duchess promised. Meanwhile, Diello woke up and didn't find Croa in bed, but he found a note she had left for him. The note said that since Diello was sleeping so soundly and she was up early, she was going to handle the final approval for the shadow shipment. She wanted to repay him for taking such good care of her. Reading this, Diello was surprised at first, and he was lost in thought. He thought to himself how thoughtful it was, recalling the warmth of her small hand and her even breathing. Then, the young man softly and gently spoke her name. Sometime later, the Duke was observing his beloved from a distance. He learned that Duke Dello had sent a sum of money to Croa for her living expenses. Diello asked curiously what the amount was. The subordinate reported that it was about 1/10 of his entire fortune. The Duke was thinking and ordered us to keep a close eye on the Duchess's movements. He thought to himself that for personal use, it was a considerable sum of money. He guessed she wouldn't squander the money on jewelry or parties like other high society ladies. He speculated that she might use the money to buy land. Then his thoughts jumped to her abilities. The power of the next heir of the Allos family, Penis Allos, was nothing compared to hers. He noted that the Allos family's water element had an advantage over the Arsenta family's fire element, and that the pharaoh wouldn't appear for several years. Diello wondered if Penis Allos was really stronger than Croa. Why would they need to use a fake pharaoh to plot a scheme? Thinking of Croa, the young man remembered her saying it was just a card to make Allos let his guard down. He added that she never said it was such a valuable card. The young man admitted to himself that after feeling that raw power in the sea, how could he not want her? He realized he wanted her more and more and couldn't let go. Just then, a servant interrupted his thoughts, saying someone wanted to see him in secret. When the Duke confirmed if it was really a secret meeting, the servant affirmed it. The servant explained that the person requesting the meeting claimed to be the real pharaoh. He added that the guest claimed the Duke knew her. He rushed toward the Diello family's reception room, ordering a thorough investigation of this pharaoh. In the reception room, the so-called guest was lounging on a small sofa. Diello recognized her as Benaya, a person known as the traitor of Arsenta. She greeted the Duke, saying it had been a long time. The girl specified more precisely that it had been since the death of the previous Duke and Duchess of Arsenta. When he pressed her about who killed his parents, she told him not to look at her so angrily. She asked, what could she do if she was a pharaoh? She added that he was probably surprised she could enter Arsenta without any hindrance, but told him not to blame his men. Benaya claimed they simply didn't dare to stop her because Duke Allos had ordered them to leave her alone, because he was backing her. Diello looked at her, noticing that this former Arsenta member could wield the power of water, but something felt off. He realized it wasn't a pure power of water like Croa's. The water power Benaiah possessed felt somewhat tainted. The young man immediately understood that Benaiah was lying about everything. He realized she didn't know that Duke Dello had already sent Croa as the pharaoh. He concluded that if Duke Dello knew Benaiah was the real pharaoh, he would have either bought her off or eliminated her long ago. This made him wonder what secret this traitor was hiding. Benaiah commented with feigned surprise that Diello Arsenta, a guy who looked like he couldn't even harm a fly, had killed his own parents. She thought that Duke Dello probably thought his plan had succeeded, but she, who had been running back and forth between Dello and Arsenta at the time, knew the truth. She claimed that Diello had let the previous Duke and Duchess die, saying he could have saved them, but he didn't. Benaiah demanded he confirm that what she said was right, but Diello remained silent. Instead, the young man asked why it had to be him. He thought painfully why the person he was supposed to love had to be someone else, and not Croa. Benaiah cut him off, suddenly appearing and accusingly asking Amel if she was really that bad. She reminded him that even though she knew his secret, she had kept it. Diello thought to himself how cleverly she twisted her words. Of course, she kept silent because of the risk of attracting the Arsenta intelligence network. Then she got to the point, asking about the fake pharaoh and mentioning she had heard about the lavish wedding. She sneered and asked if he had already given her his virginity out of sheer stupidity. Judging by the fact that he wasn't surprised to see her, she concluded that he already knew Croa was a fake. She said she didn't know what he was planning, but demanded that he get rid of Croa as soon as possible, and then they could start setting up their room. The girl offered that if he had trouble dealing with people, she could do it for him. Diello wondered what she was in a hurry for. Benaiah explained that becoming the Duchess of Arsenta would end 8 years of being ordered around, and she could finally live a life of luxury. She added that she was much more important to Arsenta than that imposter, and demanded he get the place ready immediately. Otherwise, she threatened to spread some vicious rumors around. In response, Diello asked her if she knew why he had just stood by and watched when the previous Duke and Duchess died. Benaiah guessed the young man was just impatient to become the Duke, but he stated that the dukedom would be his sooner or later and asked again, so what would he gain from it? Getting no answer, Diello said he found it amusing to watch a rabbit stare into the jaws of a predator without realizing it. He added that he didn't like moths flying into a flame and asked if she remembered that his life was in danger back then. To her counter question of whether he was physically weak, he gave a negative answer. He explained that it was unheard of for someone who inherited a stronger bloodline than his father or any Arsenta to be born physically weak. The young man explained that, basically, if you don't have enough physical strength, you can't handle that kind of magic. He confessed that he knew that if she possessed powerful magic, the seal of the head of the family would soon be passed to the one who possessed it, and when the head of the family changed, the head's pharaoh would no longer be needed. Diello sneered and asked who had poisoned him, the next Duke. Then he declared that he would not hesitate to eliminate anyone who tried to harm him, including Benaiah, who knew this secret. Fear froze on the girl's face, but she didn't show it, reminding him that she was the pharaoh, so Diello couldn't kill her. Benaiah told him to stop fooling around and start planning their wedding, saying it wasn't too late for Arsenta to find a real pharaoh. He pointed out that it wasn't too late, but too early, because Allos and Cartier were still watching Arsenta closely, and not enough traitors within Arsenta had been exposed yet. However, he thought, a traitor of Arsenta who possessed the power of water, even if the power was a bit murky, still counted as a pharaoh. Most importantly, if Croa found out that the real pharaoh had appeared, their contract would expire, and she would abandon Arsenta. Diello thought painfully how much better it would be if Croa, who was more suitable for Arsenta, were the pharaoh instead of someone like Benaiah. He wondered what the difference was between Benaiah and Croa, what Benaiah had that Croa didn't, and why Benaiah had become his pharaoh. Diello ordered that the traitor be made to suffer a fate worse than death, and to dig up all her dirty details. He added that the mistress of Arsenta could not be some frivolous representative. This enraged Benaiah. Benaiah screamed, proclaiming herself as pharaoh and demanding he release her. But Diello was determined to have something perfect. He bluntly declared that she was not the pharaoh he was supposed to love, but the pharaoh he couldn't help but fall in love with. Pella came in after Croa's invitation, saying she had brought the map she asked for. The heroine thanked her and said that now they needed to start preparing bit by bit. She asked Pella to acquire small plots of land in that area under a false name so that no one would notice. Croa added not to forget to use her own money to buy it, and the maid confirmed she understood completely. Then the mistress asked Pella to create a whole new commoner identity for her. The maid confirmed, "You mean official documents, my lady?" Croa confirmed, explaining that she couldn't exactly go live on that land using her real name, right? Suddenly, Diello knocked on the door and asked if he could come in. Croa smiled a little awkwardly, said he was already in, and invited him to come in. He noticed she was looking at the Daisy Grove files again. She confirmed, adding that she needed to review them from time to time. The young man wondered if she really intended to go to Daisy Grove. Croa replied that, in any case, when the real pharaoh appeared, she, the ex-wife, would only be in the way. Suddenly, the heroine realized that a considerable amount of time had passed since she saved Rydia's Argent. Based on this, she concluded that the real pharaoh must be appearing soon. Based on the plot, she asked anxiously, has she appeared yet? But Diello flatly denied it. Then he unexpectedly suggested that she just become a member of Arsenta. This shocked Croa, and she asked him what he meant. Croa told her husband that it wasn't as simple as it sounded. He asked why not. The girl cited the common belief that it's impossible for a man and a woman to be just friends. She asked him how he planned to introduce her. The young man said he would just introduce her as a person of Arsenta. Croa replied, a little flustered, that if he did that, she would be in big trouble. She imagined having to be wary of the new wife at all times and becoming the talk of high society. Croa added that just thinking about it gave her the creeps, so she politely declined her husband's offer. In any case, she stated firmly that she just wanted to live the rest of her life in peace, and for that, she needed to leave this place. She noticed that Diello looked visibly dejected after hearing her words. Croa commented with a hint of annoyance that with such a pure heart, he would have a hard time surviving in this dog-eat-dog world. But she promised to visit Arsenta from time to time and told her husband not to be so down. Then she asked if there was any news about the real pharaoh. Diello replied that there was none. Not yet. This answer startled Croa, and she wondered why not yet. She began to doubt herself, wondering if she had remembered the order of events incorrectly. Perhaps she had messed up the timeline. The heroine asked in surprise if there was really no news, and when Diello confirmed, she asked again if he was serious. She pointed out that something was strange and began to wonder, was saving Rydia's Argent the only thing she had changed from the original plot? She worriedly asked herself, could the impact of that event have been so great that it even changed the timing of the real pharaoh's arrival? The heroine admitted she wished the pharaoh would arrive soon, and Diello said he felt the same way. In the end, Croa decided there was nothing she could do about it for now, so she just observed for a while. She found irritably that she couldn't even work because of this worry, thinking that maybe she should take a break. Croa glanced out the window and noticed Amel looked terrible. The heroine guessed that some trouble was brewing again over at the Endless Sea. If Diello had to go there himself, it must be serious. The Duchess walked into the hallway and asked the maid, "What's going on?" Pella said there was a situation at the border of the Endless Sea and that he had gone to handle it, but said it wasn't too bad. Croa breathed a sigh of relief inwardly. The fact that they had time to tell her this time meant it probably wasn't that serious. Later, Croa told the maid she wanted to take a walk, as she couldn't concentrate on her work today. Pella said she understood and would go prepare. Walking down the stairs, Croa thought that maybe she could take a stroll in the garden at sunset. Suddenly, she stopped in her tracks and asked in surprise what those men were doing there, recognizing them as the knights who were always on the 4th floor. The heroine wondered why the 4th floor knights were on the 1st floor. Pella told her that Lord Diello had stationed them there. Suddenly, there were shouts of fire, and the Duchess asked what the commotion was about. A maid rushed in, saying the head of the family's office was on fire, along with Murda's contract. Croa thought in alarm, could it be? Pella confirmed, saying it seemed he had violated the terms. The heroine noted that Murda had finally escaped. She wondered which family he would leak her secret to. Croa realized with dread that this was happening while Diello was away. She thought, no matter which family it was, once her secret was out, she was done for. The heroine decided that since Diello was away on a campaign, she had to go after him herself immediately. She asked if they could track Murda's location. She was told that according to the Shadow's information, his route led to the northern border region. Croa concluded it was the Cartel of the Wind. Croa pointed out that there was a mountain range between the Cartel and Arsenta and asked how he planned to cross the mountains. Then it hit her, why go by land? There's a way to go by sea, by boat. Maybe Murda, along with the one who controls the wind, got on a boat that used the power of wind to cut through the waves much faster than the land route. Pella agreed and concluded sadly that if that were the case, they would never be able to catch up to Murda. But the Duchess declared that they could. She said firmly that she would start the pursuit at once, because after all, it was water. The Duke was thanked for being on the scene, which brought everything to a swift end. Someone mentioned that luckily, no magical monsters appeared this time, unlike the last time in the 4th District. Diello ordered the area to be cleared quickly and thanked Amos, the operations commander of the 1st District. However, Diello noted something strange, as he had specifically told Cassilis that a small squad would be enough to handle it. Furthermore, he added, he had been using only his sword and not his fire for some time. He guessed he had felt an emotion at the tip of his sword, and his thoughts suddenly returned to his conversation with Croa. Diello remembered suggesting she just become a member of Arsenta, but she had politely refused, saying she preferred a peaceful old age. He painfully called it an outright rejection, though to be fair, his memory of Croa's words was somewhat distorted. The young man thought with a heavy heart, did Croa really hate being in Arsenta that much? She was always scheming to leave the estate, and if that wasn't enough, now she was starting to worry about getting old. He noticed that she did it with a smile on her face, as if nothing was wrong. Diello admitted to himself that he was going crazy with anger. The Duke summoned Cassius and asked where that two-faced Murda was, the one they reported last time. Cyrus reported that he was on the north coast. The Duke announced he was in a foul mood, which meant the timing was perfect. He also ordered a boat to be prepared as they were heading to the north coast. Cyrus pointed out that men had already been sent to catch Murda, and the Duke confirmed he knew, declaring that this time he wouldn't hold a formal trial for the traitor at the estate, but would deal with him personally on the spot. Meanwhile, our heroine was sailing on a boat. She asked if whirlpools really formed periodically in the seas near the cartel, and when they usually subsided. The maid replied that the whirlpools had appeared 2 days ago, so they definitely wouldn't today. She guessed that Murda and the people from Cartier would wait on the nearest deserted island until the whirlpool subsided. Croa concluded that if they were waiting on a deserted island, it meant the whirlpools would disappear soon. She noted that time was running out and decided they needed to speed up. Soon, she spotted a deserted island, but she noticed there were 2 boats there. Croa got off the boat and set foot on the island. Suddenly, she was surprised to find them in the middle of the sea and saw a familiar male figure. No way, she couldn't believe Diello was here. A second later, she noticed bodies scattered around her beloved. He asked Croa how she got here. She explained that while he was on the battlefield, she received a message from the office that Murda's contract was burning, so she came in his place. Croa looked at the mess and asked if he was responsible for all this. The young man said sadly that enforcing a contract was such a downer, as he had written it hoping it would not be broken. He added that he hadn't expected Croa to show up here. Croa admitted she hadn't expected to see Diello here either, or rather, to see him like this. Diello apologized for letting her see him like this. She mentally noted the strong smell of blood. Croa asked if he had discovered Murda's breach of contract during his campaign and then rushed straight here. Diello confirmed that he could feel it when a contract was broken and explained that Arsenta had too many rules and the punishment for traitors was a given. Croa asked in alarm just what kind of person he was, but the young man didn't answer, instead reminding Croa that she had said she wanted to leave Arsenta, which she confirmed. He stated that he didn't think Croa would just tell Arsenta's secrets to anyone, but he pointed out that she had also learned a few things about Arsenta. He said she understood perfectly and suggested she stay in Arsenta, as she was a perfect fit. Croa retorted that they had already talked about this, but he insisted that it wasn't just him. Many people in Arsenta wanted her to stay. He promised he would try to persuade Pella, and Croa wondered in surprise what that meant. Then Diello clarified that Pella's opinion didn't matter, and he could make sure it didn't. The heroine thought to herself that it was hard to resist when he pleaded with that face. Suddenly, the young man's tone changed from pleading for the girl to state one that was stern and serious. Diello said that if Croa refused him and didn't stay in Arsenta, he would be very upset. Croa finally decided to say something, but noticed he was trembling. Diello didn't let her speak. He confessed that he hated goodbyes. He pointed out that the sea only ever brought him people who were leaving Arsenta, and Croa knew this wasn't a lie. She remembered that although she only knew half of the original story, it did mention something similar. A young Diello would often sit by the sea, endlessly waiting for the return of a knight who had already died in battle 10 days prior. But the young Diello back then wasn't ready to accept reality. The heroine could understand that a kind soul like Diello was suffering. The girl suggested the young man calm down first and promised she wouldn't leave without saying goodbye. Diello asked if she was promising him that it was true, and Croa confirmed that she was. She promised Diello that even if the real pharaoh appeared, they wouldn't separate right away, and the young man thanked her. Croa thought that before she left, she should first make him mentally stronger, and that she had to be careful, not wanting to hurt him. Just then, Pella interrupted them, apologizing for the disturbance, but said it was time to deal with the aftermath. Croa agreed, telling Diello it was time for them to go, and he didn't argue. He announced they needed to cover their tracks and return to Arsenta, and the knights responded that they would obey. Croa told her husband that he needed to practice his facial expressions, and he asked in surprise what she meant. She explained that if the young man showed his usual expression like the one he just had in front of enemies, he would become easy prey. The girl suggested Diello try to make a scary face. He tried, but she commented that he looked like he was dissatisfied with his meal. The heroine felt this wouldn't do and promised to teach him herself. Croa announced with a mischievous smile that she was going to teach her husband how to play the villain, how to be a charismatic ruler, everything. She pointed out that she wasn't as naive as Diello and could be a good teacher. The man replied that it was a great honor to have Croa as his teacher. Croa began the first lesson. Don't smile so brightly. Then she suggested he rest for now while she went upstairs to check on the situation. The heroine explained that the sea monsters were getting more dangerous, so she was going to... Suddenly, he grabbed a dagger and cut his own shoulder. Croa anxiously noticed Diello was bleeding and worriedly asked if he was okay and what had happened. She said she hadn't seen that wound before. The young man explained that during the fight, he felt Murda's sword graze his arm, but didn't pay much attention to it. He figured the wound must have slowly opened up after that. The heroine offered to get a doctor right away, but the man refused, just asking her to stay with him. He explained that there might be other traitors around, and he didn't want to reveal his condition, neither here nor back at the mansion. The girl agreed that it made sense and offered to stop the bleeding for now, promising to look after him until the wound healed. Diello agreed and thanked her. So, as the heroine bandaged Diello, he admitted that considering how long they had known each other, he thought Murda would have made a wiser choice. Croa asked if he really thought someone he had known for a long time wouldn't betray him, and the man confirmed it painfully. The girl irritably called him a fool, saying this wouldn't do, that this was too much. She worried that if things kept going on like this, there would definitely be problems in the future. Croa decided she needed to take this opportunity to set him straight. She asked her husband if he was investigating those who were planning to defect to the cartel. He replied that the informants would find out soon enough. Arsenta's intelligence department was no joke, especially its head, Rick. They said he was crazy for Arsenta, a truly loyal servant, despite his nickname being the white-faced madman. She suggested that the intelligence department do its job, and they would root out the traitors in their own way. The young man was surprised and asked her how. The heroine gave a cunning smile and told him he would see for himself later. Rumors spread through the palace, and people were shocked that there was a traitor in Argenta, saying things were much better when the former duke was alive. Incidentally, it was said that Kadir wanted to use the defector from Argenta, that he wanted to squeeze information out of Mirda, and then, the usual bad things. Croa explained to her husband that she believed if they spread this rumor, they could catch the other traitors as well. Diello called the idea brilliant. Croa thought to herself that she had successfully used this body's memory of how the original heroine would have acted in this situation. The Duke received word that the guys had heard the rumor and felt their plan to enter Kadir was ruined. So they tried to escape, but these guys were tight-lipped. The knights asked what to do with them, and one of the subordinates suggested they handle it themselves. Then, Croa asked Diello if she could interrogate them personally. The Duke agreed, but warned her that those men wouldn't talk easily, not even in the face of death. The girl replied that there are many ways to scare people without killing them and requested 2 rooms be prepared, preferably with a glass wall in between, but if not, to ensure sound could travel through. The heroine declared that she would teach her husband how to make a man talk without laying a hand on him. She told him to watch closely. He looked at Croa's sparkling eyes and wondered what else she wanted from him. A knight greeted the Duke, stating he was ready to carry out his orders. The Duke said to do whatever the Duchess told them to do. As expected of Argenta's intelligence department, they were frighteningly skilled, carrying out all of Diello's orders with razor-sharp precision. It seemed Diello had the intelligence department firmly in his grasp, perhaps because Argenta's most loyal people were gathered here. Then, Diello turned his gaze to Croa, and a smile immediately bloomed on his face. The young man asked his wife if she needed anything else. Croa replied in the negative, saying it was enough, and Diello suggested the heroine go with him. The protagonist pointed out sternly that many people wanted to get into Kadir. She also knew they planned to slip away one by one, in turns, to avoid arousing suspicion. "All right," said the Duchess. Everyone had better listen up. She had just announced that the place would be flooded with water, bit by bit. Then she ordered the knights to turn the taps on full blast. The prisoners suddenly panicked, shouting that the water level was rising and the pressure was too much. Croa explained that the water level would only start to drop on the side that named the traitors, and the receding water would flow to the other side. Our girl asked if they really intended to keep their mouths shut. Diello wondered if his beloved would continue to apply pressure or end it all in the same way. Suddenly, the Duchess ordered them to turn the taps on all the way. A scream tore through the air. When the water reached their chins, the prisoners began to shout names. One traitor even yelled out Ilian's name, and another screamed that Antra was also a traitor. One traitor shouted Octavio's name, another yelled Uber's, and then a whole bunch of other names were revealed. Then the prisoners screamed in despair that they were drowning and begged for their lives. Diello noticed that Croa was trembling. It seemed she was under a great deal of stress. But Diello was very surprised by this and wondered to himself why Croa was so panicked. Croa, known as the villainess, was so ruthless and cruel that she was said to have dealt with servants in the past, all because they had disrespected her for her naturally weak abilities. Croa's nature was notoriously savage and merciless. That was all there was to her. But now she looked as if she had never harmed a single life. This seemed to be another side of her. The traitor said hoarsely that there were no more traitors and swore he was telling the truth. Then the Duchess asked if that meant there were 13 traitors in total. The intelligence agent confirmed it, and she double-checked if they had written them all down. The protagonist waved her hand, and in an instant, the shackles and chains binding the prisoners snapped. The traitors were able to surface and finally catch their breath. Croa turned to Diello, explaining that she hadn't killed them yet because they might still know something. Diello was surprised and asked if he should be the one to interrogate them himself. Croa affirmed this, reminding him that he was the head of the family. She said the kid needed to get used to interrogations, that there was no other way, so he should stop looking so pathetic. She added that it was better to live in disgrace than to die innocent. Diello said he would try to take her advice, and Croa told him she was going to get some rest. Stepping into the hallway and closing the door behind her, the protagonist thought that maybe she should have stayed with Diello. But she immediately told herself sternly that the young man needed to toughen up too. The girl mentally urged him to pull himself together and expressed her belief that he could do it. Afterwards, she turned to Pila, told her they had somewhere to go, and asked her to lead the way. Croa's destination was the first floor of the main building, where she had been stopped by the knights from the 4th floor last time. The girl explained that they needed to figure out why the 4th floor knights were stationed on the 1st floor. So the Duke stood silently, watching the prisoners. The prisoners began to beg their master to spare them, promising to live like ghosts. The master felt that since Croa had left them alive, she wanted to teach him mercy. The prisoners began to thank him, but he then announced that, unlike his bride's expectations, he was not a refined man, but a beast. After that, their desperate cries for help echoed. The man explained that he would listen to his bride, who wished for him to be merciful to them. He let them choose for themselves whether they wanted to be smoked to death or drowned in water. So, the protagonist, standing on the 1st floor, felt confused. She noted that this place used to be crowded with knights from the 4th floor, but now it was back to having only some novices. Croa thought to herself that there must be a reason why Argenta's key knights were sent here. Suddenly, it dawned on the girl that the knights were simply guarding this entrance. Then the lady asked what was behind that door, and the maid told her it was just the passage to the basement. The protagonist remembered that in the original story, that place was only described as an off-limits area for staff. She felt that since there were so many fourth-floor knights here, it meant there was something very important inside. Suddenly, Diello appeared out of nowhere, as if he had sprung from the ground. He asked Croa if she happened to have heard the story of the, how to put it, eccentric count. The count allowed his wife to go anywhere, but told her the basement was strictly forbidden. The protagonist wondered if Diello was playing the role of that eccentric count. Croa pointed out that this meant he was actually telling her to stop. Right there. She didn't know why they were being so secretive, but the more they hid it, the more suspicious it became. The girl felt that although it was strange to go in without permission, this could be a huge red flag. So, since they told her not to go, she wouldn't. Then she asked if the interrogation of the traitors went well. She received an affirmative answer. She praised Diello and told him to keep up the good work. Just then, the kid suddenly asked if she wanted to go to the basement. The protagonist was caught off guard by the question. Croa pointed out that the count in that story didn't seem very willing to open the door. Diello corrected her, reminding her that he was a duke now. The girl thought the logic was a bit messy, but since he offered, why not agree? She happily consented. Upon reaching the basement, the girl discovered a statue. Diello explained that it was a statue dedicated to the sea god. Croa was confused that an idol of the sea god would be found in the basement of the fiery Arsenta. She thought to herself that a family that valued skills above all else wouldn't believe in gods. Suddenly, they encountered a man who introduced himself as Rick. He was a loyal servant of Arsenta who served as the head of the intelligence department. He greeted the Duchess enthusiastically, saying it was a great honor to meet her. The heroine replied, somewhat nervously, that she was also pleased to meet him. She thought to herself, so this is him, Arsenta's intelligence chief, that sparkling madman, Rick. He claimed to be here because he was praying for the well-being and safety of Arsenta. Croa thought to herself that it was very suspicious for Arsenta's #1 fan to be praying to the sea god. Although she didn't know the reason, one thing was certain. Rick was talking nonsense. Diello told them that this place used to be an underground prison, so she guessed the place was recently built and wondered why it had changed now. Diello said that he thought she, Croa, might like it, so he had the whole setup done here. He added that they believed in the sea god and aloes, then became flustered, pointing out that there was currently only one statue here. After hearing him, she felt that although something was still off, but it was probably nothing. Late at night, Croa felt it was time to sleep when a maid reported that there was intelligence. After getting permission to enter, she announced that a fire had broken out in the annex, adding that fortunately, it hadn't spread. Croa was very surprised, wondering how a fire could break out in Arsenta, the homeland of fire control masters. The maid pointed out that sometimes your own pet dog can bite you. She called it an unexpected accident, but Croa was very suspicious. She felt that Pilar looked far too calm, even if the damage was minor. She began to connect the dots. Mirda's betrayal, a series of other crimes, and the subsequent punishments, and the intelligence department, which, to be honest, was known for arranging these kinds of unfortunate incidents. The protagonist felt there were too many coincidences, as if everything had been meticulously planned. Finally, she told the maid she understood and dismissed her. Lying in bed, she sighed bitterly, admitting to herself that she knew Arsenta was ruthless to its enemies, but now she felt it even more strongly. She began to wonder what would happen to her when it was time for her to leave this family. Then Croa decided that she would, of course, have to maintain close ties with them, but she needed to make them understand that even after she left, she would still be their ally. The protagonist didn't notice that she had drifted off to sleep, her thoughts interrupted by the sudden appearance of flames. Fire, she yelled, then thought aloud. Is it Diello? Could it be? Everything was being consumed by the raging fire, the furniture crackling and breaking apart. The heat was unbearable, and she felt like she was about to be scorched. She couldn't breathe, and she knew she had to put out the fire on the blanket. Croa suddenly realized she couldn't use her water abilities. All the moisture around her had evaporated. She was completely cut off. She felt she had to escape, that the entire building was about to collapse. A new wave of panic washed over her at the thought of little Diello being crushed. Then a strange thought crossed her mind. She didn't understand why she knew who this child was or what would happen next. How do I know all this? She asked herself, then concluded that it was just a dream. Afterwards, she said softly, I see now, this must be the nightmare from the original story that always plagued Croa. The child was wailing nonstop, trembling like a leaf. The girl just couldn't bring herself to leave him behind. Steeling herself, she decided they would escape together. She walked over and called out to him in a gentle voice. The child looked up at her, his face streaked with tears. The protagonist felt a chill when she saw that the child had black hair and blue eyes. Croa's suspicions were confirmed. This was definitely Diello as a child, but he whispered that he couldn't get out. The child kept saying the fire was too strong and there was no way out. Croa realized in despair that they were trapped. Little Diello kept shouting at her to leave because it was impossible for both of them to be saved. The protagonist shouted the boy's name and began to beg him to hold on. Suddenly, the situation reversed. She realized with surprise and relief that it was the real Diello with her now. He looked worried and asked if she'd had a nightmare, saying she was pale and had been calling his name in her sleep. Croa confirmed that she had dreamed of being trapped in a burning building with a child. She reassured him that she sometimes had dreams like that, so it was no big deal and everything was fine. Don't worry. The man sighed in relief, thanking God. But she thought to herself that this was the first nightmare she'd had since coming here, and it had felt too real. She remembered that the original Croa had also been plagued by nightmares, and apparently it was unavoidable for her as well. Croa resolved that even if the dreams tormented her, she couldn't let them come true. They had to protect this lily. Then she turned to Diello and asked if the meeting of the three great families was coming up, which he confirmed. He began to explain that every 3 years, the three families would gather to discuss matters of guarding the ancient temple. But according to him, the meeting was now just for sizing each other up and squeezing the weak. He warned that a crisis was brewing and things were getting complicated. But what really worried her was the lily on him. She pointed out that if it was that bright, it would arouse suspicion. Croa began to think hard about what to do and analyze the positions of the other families. Duke Dello knew she wasn't the real pharaoh, and he was furious that his plan had failed, even trying to extort money from her. Meanwhile, Duke Dello believed she was the pharaoh, but he wondered why Argenta's weakest leader hadn't captured her yet. However, the heroine thought Duke Dello would try to expose their scheme, so the bright lily was now a big problem. They decided they needed to hide it, at least during the meeting. Diello agreed, but mentioned it was a bit itchy, to which Croa snapped back at him. She was afraid that if someone saw them talking like this, they might think she was just flirting with him. She started making excuses, saying she was just checking how to hide the lily, and the man confirmed it was very important. The girl explained that if they hid it, the other families would let their guard down. But he countered, warning her that they would still try to check the lily. When she asked if makeup could hide it, he said no, explaining that the lily's magic would still be visible. The girl felt he was right. She herself could feel that strange energy, the power of the pharaoh that hindered the strength of Argenta's head. She concluded that any mage from the three great families could recognize it. So simply hiding the lily wasn't enough. They needed to hide her magic to deceive everyone, and Diello asked how on earth they were going to do that. After thinking, she said there was a way, but there was one major catch. Diello curiously asked what it was. The heroine replied that the only person who knew how to hide magic was currently in Alos.